So
I will.
graphologically speaking, fear of success is found in the lower loops of letter Y or G, when instead of going and completing the loops, when the loop starts drooping down. So you make a circle, but the loops droop down. So at the end of it, they do not touch the neck of the Y, but at the middle of it, it starts turning downwards. So that's what the stroke formation looks like. So
The rate at which you're unraveling me, I think I will go back to typing. So,
hi there. Thank you so much for joining me one more time on the Absolutely Right podcast, India's first graphology based podcast show. I'm your host, Aditi Surana. I'm a behavioral analyst and a high performance coach. On our Wednesday episode, we invite some amazing individuals, some high performers, some, path breakers, and try and decode their personalities and their success formula. We try and understand what makes them so successful by decoding their personalities, their behaviors, and by understanding why they think the way they do. Obviously, with the help of the questions that I ask them and using graphology or handwriting analysis. So, if you're new to this subject, if you're new to this podcast, all you got to do is grab your own handwriting sample. And like most people, if you don't have it, just write a few lines so that when I analyze a guest and talk about the traits, you can find if you have those success traits in your writing or not. As simple as that. Our guest on the show today is Mr. Anil Nair with 25 years of experience in advertising. He is the CEO of VMLY&R India, the leading ad agency in the country. Now, when he describes brands, he talks about them like people. And I love the fact that he talks about people's stories the way he understands brands. That correlation, I don't think I ever had in my mind. So there were many, many anecdotes in the conversation, many ways in which he understood people, understood brands, and the life lessons that he learned running this business and being a high performer that he is. I cannot wait for you to listen to this interview. Make sure that you have your handwriting sample ready. So, as I talk about his behavior, you can analyze yourself and discover some interesting aspects. Let's get started. Hi, Anil. Welcome to the Absolutely Right show. How are you doing?
I'm doing amazing, Aditi. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I'm so happy to meet you and all the elephants on your shirt. For which, by the way,
Likewise.
for which our producer and Anil both insisted that I change and I wear the outfit with elephants too for our listeners who cannot see it. But yes, let's address the elephant in the room right away.
My joke, but I'm going to let Aditi crack
Okay, fine. Go ahead, crack that one. I thought you
it.
might miss it, so I didn't want to miss that one. It was good. So Anil, when we were talking yesterday before the conversation, we asked you too many questions about why this career, what got you here, and today on the show we're going to explore exactly that, and we want to know, as a leader, as a person in this field, which is ever changing, extremely stressful, how do you manage to stay on the top of your game, and how do you continue to perform and question the norms and keep pushing, your own limits to go ahead. So, my first question to you is: did you know as a child that you would choose something like this as a career, which is so creative and, offbeat in a way?
Fantastic. Aditi, before I answer that, I just want you're the first graphologist that I am meeting, and
Okay.
therefore, like in life, you do new things. So this is a new thing that I'm doing, which is sitting down and talking to a graphologist, and
Nice.
hopefully being coached by one and walking away from this meeting with learning. So I'm very very excited to be here on your show. So thank you
Thank you.
for
Thank you.
choosing me. Uh, Coming to the question that you asked, and it's got two parts to it, Aditi, which is when I grew up, we didn't have too much of career counseling and stuff like that. We, uh, uh, like I've heard in places, there's something called Brahminical restraint. And at those times, people just kind of grew up, and every parent wanted their children to get some kind of a paying profession. And those days, the paying profession was either medicine or engineering. I also remember at some point that I wanted to be a chef, and I remember just bringing this up with my parents. But for them, the list was medicine, engineering, and if or administrative services at that point of time.
Okay.
but that's where things get interesting. Today, you have a graphologist, and a graphologist is mainstream now. When I speak to younger people today, there are like thousands and
Sure,
thousands of
sure.
professions and vocations and interests and stuff like that, which is interesting, which at our point we didn't have. But what is interesting as a learning here is the fact that if there is a DNA within you, if there is I genuinely believe that every human being has a superpower,
Wow.
and no matter big, tall, short, able, unable, or whatever you are, I think every human being has a superpower. And as a leader, one of the things I consciously do is look out for that superpower. So
How
in my
nice.
case, I feel that, maybe there was a superpower within me which tended to creativity. But due to the constraints of the time, I was nearly going to do dentistry. Then I did my biomedical engineering. From there, I did my MBA. But
Okay.
your superpower in some way guides you to eventually where you want to be, and led me to the business of absolute joy, which is creativity and which is advertising, where like I was telling you yesterday, every day is a new day,
Right.
every day is a new challenge in that sense. And I think my journey of creativity is not over yet. I just feel like I was telling you yesterday that I've picked up my old hobby of caricaturing and sketching, so I'm going to do that. I don't know whether you can see, but I just got, for my birthday, I got gifted a piano, so I'm back
Oh,
to
how
you know
nice.
so, and I also know my eventual goal, which is uh, I, 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 I wish to direct at least one film, and I would have to have the pleasure of around, a few people sitting in the audience, and if I can kind of alter their emotion in some way, make them laugh, cry, or so. l- Though I have a full-time job, there is still so much to do and achieve.
This is so interesting. When I decided to become a graphologist, my father freaked out. A South Indian father that I had, he genuinely believed that I should become an engineer because he thought I would do very good with whatever logic that he assessed in me. But I wanted to work with people. So I constantly kept putting up my case. And when I said the word graphologist, he said, What? What is it? Like, no, no, that's not happening. So I, by the way, had to leave my home to pursue my career. So I agree that the superpower finds you and shows you the way ahead, no matter how tough it looks or how difficult it becomes. So
Totally.
thank
A
you for
little tip
mentioning
for
that
all
point.
the parents out there and would-be parents, which is, keep an eye out for that superpower in your child,
Oh, nice.
and try and fan it. You don't have to do too many things, but at least give an avenue for the child to kind of to kind of express it.
But also, Anil, what you're saying is they will find it any which ways. You might as well help. Otherwise, they will,
Yes,
fight you and they will go ahead and do what they have to do any which ways.
yes.
That's
And they'll fight it,
interesting.
or they'll fight the system, or or time to kind of get that done. But eventually, it does reach people.
How nice. I like that thought.
Yes,
It's super optimistic to think about it.
yes. That's another, if every human being is a brand, and if every brand has got these brand pillars or brand muscles, then one of them is optimism. And I don't know why, but that's something that maybe it's my upbringing, or maybe it's the people that influenced me, or the people that I saw around me. But I tend to be like super optimistic as a person.
So I can't let you go with that thought. You said if a person was a brand. Please explore that further. How do you look at people as brands? And what do you mean by that?
So there are two things. The opposite of brand is a commodity. If you look at humankind in its largeness, we are commodities, in the sense there's 6 billion of us.
Right.
And but what happens is,
Or human
as we
resource, as they say it. We're just a
human
resource.
resource, as they
Yeah.
say, we are just a resource. But as we grow up, what happens is different influences start getting imprinted on you, which is your background, your parents, their education, the places that you grow up, the teachers that teach you stuff, the people you learn stuff from, the influences that you see, whether you live like I grew up in a two channel. When I was in my early years of growing up, you only had two channels on Doordarshan. Today you
Right.
have some 400 channels on TV, which people don't watch, and there are 4 million channels streaming at you from YouTube
YouTube and
and from
everywhere.
Instagram, and all of that. So all of this starts kind of influencing you, and then slowly, you start picking up values, you start picking up traits, you start picking up, mannerisms, points of view, attitudes, and that distinguishes Aditi from me. Though you can even have two children from the same household, but can grow up to become two different brands. And I was the other day speaking. A friend of mine who's a professor invited me to speak to his class, and they were a bunch of HR professionals, and their question to me was like, how do we build a brand? How do we,
Mm.
we as a professional build a brand, and how do we, because they're in the business of HR, how do we tell people that we coach and mentor to build brands of themselves? So uh, we don't have to go with that commercial way of brand building, but to be aware of the fact that you are a brand, and what are your values, what are your traits, what's your mission, what is your purpose. I think it's an interesting exercise that I keep doing, and I mentor all the people who work with me to do as well.
I'm going to borrow this concept. I really like this. This is so nice because as a coach, we talk a lot about, knowing your purpose, going closer to who you are and being authentic with that idea. So what you're saying is exactly applicable, or we can find comparisons between branding exercise for a company and for
Yes,
an individual to identify who they are.
yes, yes,
So interesting. So, Anil, I have your handwriting sample in front of me. We asked you
yes.
to write a paragraph on a blank, unruled sheet of paper, and it's a paragraph. So, you have picked up a thought and you wrote everything that came to your mind. I have a question. After how many years did you write?
That's a very, very interesting one, Aditi, because I used to be a prolific writer, and writer in the sense I used to carry a fountain pen. For those people who don't know what a pen is, it's a pen filled with ink, and you had an ink pot, and so the lovely pens. And if you I also like the entire handwriting process, and playing with letters and stuff like that. And so you could have different pens, and you could cut the edges of the nibs, and then they would
Right.
calligraphy, different styles of calligraphy and stuff like that. And over the last 10-15 years, all we do is swipe right, swipe left, type and stuff like that. And very, very rarely, other than signing a document, do you end up writing something.
True.
And when you asked me to write, I was like cursing you a bit, because I had to go find a pen and a piece of paper, and then I was figuring out what to write, and then my hands felt a bit unsteady on the paper, and then I was afraid of being judged. And I went back to my early memories of school, which is like, was my handwriting like this when I started
Oh.
off? So I went through 1 hour of pain, but then I started
Oh.
enjoying it as the process went by, and which is why I was quite curious to hear from you. What's
So, after
your
how many
deep?
years did you write?
I've been writing on and off, but I think a paragraph of this nature, I
Yeah.
think I'm writing after maybe, I don't know, 10 years or something.
Oh,
So
wow. Okay. So, the first thing that stands out when I look at your writing is the formation of long upper loops and lower loops, and now let me explain what it means. The top part talks about the brain or intellectual activity. The bottom part, the lower zone, talks about your everyday activities, your materialistic engagement. So in your case, the intellectual aspect is well defined. If an idea or project is not exciting, not challenging, not questioning you in some or the other manner, you would not be interested. You would find the quickest way to delegate it to someone and move forward. And that very few people understand about you, very few people pay attention to, because you do not give that impression easily. You generally keep your conversation light and don't talk to people about the actual pursuit that you have. And most of them are intellectual, intuitive, spiritual, if I may say, but moreover about life at a different level and not every day for sure.
Aditi, if you are not a graphologist who I know for the last 2 days, I would say that you're a bit of a magician, because just from simple handwriting, if you could gather that about me. But that's very, very true in terms of I uh, I fancy myself. Most of us are, so it's not about me. But as a bit of a dreamer, I tend to daydream. I tend to go off on these little,
Escapades.
fantasy journeys of possibilities in that sense. And what you spoke about, which is every situation, how do you kind of connect it to some other abstract situation, opening up a set of possibilities? And that is that little intellectual space that I enjoy in that
That
sense.
is your game. No matter where
Yes,
the client is going, projects are going, your game is problem solving at that level.
yes,
So
yes.
it's kind of also non-linear, isn't it? Like you tend to jump off the whole conversation, jump off whatever is happening, go in your own world and come back seamlessly and come up with, like, 15 other ways or possibilities of looking at the same thing.
Yeah. So I spoke to you yesterday about serendipity. So this other pillar that I have in my life is serendipity, which is somewhere there is this little battle of, we as human beings, are here by chance, and we lead life by chance, and therefore to structure and to go about things in a very very organized manner is a bit of an anathema to me. But thanks to serendipity, I also did engineering, and engineering teaches you to think of things in boxes, in lines, in postulates,
Right.
in formulas and theorems. And I, somewhere the creative person inside me, and there's always this little tensity between the right brain and the left brain. But in retrospect, I am grateful that I even got the experience to do engineering, because it allows me to temper these flights of fancy.
So
So
there's a book written by Deepak Chopra. I read it in 2004. It's called Synchro Destiny. So what you're talking about, he approaches the serendipity in life and nature with the logic of quantum physics. And he
yes,
comes up with complete ideation of, or is his idea that he proposes there is, if you can find the pattern like that, you'll be able to create. So it's not only synchronicity, but
correct,
synchro destiny. So you pretty much create your destiny by seeing these small patterns in your life. So it's just interesting. I think you would like.
awesome. I think I'll read that book. Yes.
So do you have any question for me before I go ahead?
I do. I do. In fact, I want to start with a broad question, Aditi, which is, I last count, I believe you've spoken to some 150 or 180 leaders as part of this series itself. And these are people on at the top of the game. And these are people, who literally, the collective experience of these 150 leaders would be, humongous. What is one common trait that you see amongst all these leaders, because you've had a ringside view of and what are some of the uncommon things that so just a few common and uncommon.
Okay. So, through our podcast specifically, we have had 75 leaders that we spoke with. But last 17 years, I've been doing this. So, there are
Correct,
variety of people. So it's also like people who are extremely efficient and people who are extremely non-efficient that you come across and you keep seeing. So by
correct,
the logic of negation, you also understand what works and what doesn't work, why this person
correct,
is not successful. So your question is kind of, covering both these grounds, and I really find it
correct.
interesting. One of the most common things that I have found is the leader's ability to learn and reinvent himself or herself. And
Awesome.
this is so wonderful because they are thrown into situations every single day, and they look at the situation, they gauge it, and then they find a solution. So it's also connected to ego. The leaders who have lesser ego, which means, they're not vested in this whole idea how cool I am and how great I am, then their performance goes much higher. So they then cater to the situation at hand. But leaders who are
Yeah,
driven by what I already know and they're not willing to learn from the situation, then they close down the options, and then they feel they are busy creating or recreating the success that they have already created in the past. So that's a
sure,
big trap. So that's
sure,
first. I feel the other thing which again and again seen is their ability to question things. So they would pick up challenges even if nobody's asking them for. They would look at a gap and they say, can we explore this gap, can we question this particular norm? And people are like, but life is going on, why do you have to do it?
correct,
But because they go ahead and they do it, they'll end up moving the needle and they actually end up creating what they do. On the other side, the question that you asked, what is a common
yeah,
thing with which people kind of fail in that sense? I feel the most common thing here is fear of failure, where people don't want to fail. They want to have
correct,
a perfect, predictable formula to move forward. and somebody telling them, do these three things and you'll achieve the success that you want. And I think we are trained in that sense. We are, in our schools, in our colleges, in our MBA programs, we are trained that, oh, look at the case studies and replicate and copy this
Correct.
document and paste it, and you will be able to achieve and replicate the results. Data supports this, research supports that. So people have forgotten what you were, rightly saying, their touch with their own instinct, their ability to really play multiple possibilities in their heads and figure out what works in the situation. So that I feel we do not teach our kids or youngsters, and thereby when they're thrown into the actual problems that life, they do not know how to react to it. So I believe
Awesome.
that is the
Yes.
biggest one. I was looking at your writing, and one of the things that you might not be aware of, but I want to talk about it looking at your writing, is fear of being successful.
I don't know how you arrive at that, but the interesting thing is, I just believe that there is the external self that you project, okay,
Mm,
and that you kind of then build over time, because those are the things that work for you.
right.
And then there is the inner you, which is in a state of flux and turmoil all the time. Honestly, I haven't given this much of thought, but I can assure you that if I dig a bit deeper, and I'm coming at it from a very, very authentic
Sure.
perspective. So on one hand, I have, like, in the eyes of the world, I think I'm moderately successful. But
Highly
on the other
successful.
on the other hand, I think there may be what you just said, a fear of being successful, and it can maybe go back to some real childhood trigger that I have, which is this fear of putting myself completely out there, or the fear of being judged.
Or
Uh,
I
the,
would
re- the
I would also describe the trait slightly different here. Fear of success is also not being able to take the team that you care for or people that you care for at the same pace that you want to go. And when you feel that you have only two choices, either you run at the speed that you can or leave people behind, then you are choosing not to run because of, you know all the people that you want to run with or take along. So I believe that the choice comes more from that perspective.
Interesting. And these are standard challenges that most leaders face, because you problems are not open-ended. Problems come with expiry dates, in terms of, you need to sort that problem out within a week, or because you live in that kind of an environment. And
Right. So, graphologically speaking, fear of success is found in the lower loops of letter Y or G, when instead of going and completing the loops, when the loop starts drooping down. So you make a circle, but the loops droop down. So at the end of it, they do not touch the neck of the Y, but at the middle of it, it starts turning downwards. So that's what the stroke formation looks like. So
the rate at which you're unraveling me, I think I will go back to typing. So
oops, I thought you just fell in love with writing again. I don't want to
no,
scare you,
no, not
Anil.
at all. Not at all. I was just joking.
So, another aspect of your personality which stands out, and you also describe that how you like to write with fountain pens, and even when I look at the pressure of the writing is quite high, it talks about someone who loves sensory experiences. So anything that you pick up, any hobby or any experience for that matter, you believe a lot in discerning it to the highest degree possible. So you know how it is, people who have acute sense of hearing, they can listen to different ragas and they can find the difference, which to a normal ear would be the same thing, but they know where the pauses were different and where there was, they have the ability to discern. And same people with all five senses, people can have that. Some people can pick taste differently and they know the nuances and the difference. Similarly for you, there are more than one things for sure. And I believe like it's a bunch of things that you indulge in where you take pride in discerning it to the T. Please tell us what
Sure.
are your hobbies like?
No, that's an interesting one, and like I said, one of the pillars of my life is this density. And I believe that makes my life richer, which is it's not unipolar. It is not unidimensional, in the sense, as in there's always a bit of tension going on between two opposing So coming to the
So,
sensory
so
piece,
explore this one a bit more. Tensity is a concept that you believe that one should have, or you kind of you
density
have it and
makes
you deal
life
with it.
density makes life enriching in the
Okay.
sense it is. I'll give you an example. There is sweet, and then there is sour, and then there is Maggie sweet and sour. So the sweet and sour adds that bit of dimension to each other and makes it.
So
If you
only
ask me,
sweet and only sour won't be fun, is what you're saying. The fact that they're
only
together.
only that they're together and they are kind of, and that's the sheer nature of this world as well. Everything that we look at in the absolute today is the fusion of something that, over time, that has happened. So the pizza that
Wow.
you eat today or the books that you read today is all a fusion of somebody's thoughts, somebody's actions, and stuff like that. And if you start, like, I believe, if one starts looking at one's own life, you will find this fusion. So I'll tell you the density that exists in this entire piece that you spoke about, which is sensorial experiences. Uh, I love sensorial experiences. So be it music or be it food or be it anything that I do, uh, I like you so rightly said, my mind tends to capture all those fine notes and stuff like that. I I'm looking at the entire experience of being in the room, and it really helps me in meetings and stuff like that. So wherein I know the twitch of an eyebrow, the fan going on somewhere, a little change in the energy of the room, and then especially in my business where I'm in the business of selling ideas, it helps me pivot, it helps me change, it helps me move the dynamics of that particular presentation or who I'm kind of speaking to. So yes, I enjoy this piece, and it also creates a small little cocoon for myself. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you was, again, derived from the leaders that you've met and stuff like that, which is, I believe that a leader is known by the amount of leaders the leader can produce.
Wow.
So
Beautifully said.
uh, and again, there is a bit of a core human barrier there, which is fear and greed. The
Mm.
fear of creating more leaders because of redundancy, and the greed, which is, why should I share my knowledge with other people, because that's your currency in that sense. So how does one deal with the dichotomy of that? Like, we all do, and I genuinely believe that your legacy that you create is the sheer amount of leaders that you can build around you, and maybe people who are better than you. So, do you have any thoughts on that based on your interactions with other leaders?
So one of the things that I came across and really liked that thought. One of my teachers was talking about this, and he said it's about creating an environment where the garden can grow. Because no matter what you do, you cannot force a tree to grow. And he
Yeah,
said same with people. So many times people or leaders I've seen, they want to create leaders to leave a legacy, which is their ego trip. They want to do it because it's almost like see how many leaders have I created in this organization. But when you create an environment with or without your knowledge, it keeps growing. And that requires consistent work, and it requires more work than one can imagine to make sure that the environment is maintained, like you create that culture which allows the new leadership to come, or people to grow, or people who don't fit in to then leave without you getting affected by it. So that I feel, if that is the objective, to create an environment where people can grow and thereby the leaders of tomorrow, then it is slightly easier. But the very moment you take up upon yourself, then you might replicate your leadership style in other people. So one
think
thing, as a coach, they say you should always remember that every teacher should be wary of the fact that your student shouldn't get influenced by others, including yourself. So if
sure.
I enforce myself knowingly or unknowingly, then I will replicate that person and they won't be able to find their authenticity. And as a leader, you would agree with that, that being authentically yourself as a leader is way more powerful than following someone else's style.
Sure. No, I think that's truly, powerful, which is, I think, half the problem with the world, which is because of lack of time, lack of resources, everybody is trying to fit people into a box, as opposed
True.
to the open source way of doing things, or the old Gurukul system, or whatever different systems
It
that were
which is
there in the
tougher,
world,
right? Which is
which is tougher.
definitely tougher because you do
Yeah,
require that level of engagement with people. And if you want to grow at the speed that we are demanded to grow, then we believe that won't be possible. So I
correct,
agree that it is not an easy task, especially keeping your targets in mind.
correct, totally.
The other aspect that I was talking about is where empathy is your fundamental nature of approaching any project. Unlike the taskmaster that you come across, and your subordinates may call you like, he's a go-getter and all of that. But if you're looking at a product, if you're looking at a brand, if you're looking at a person, you first put yourself in their world. And it's important for you to do that when you kind of sense them, who they are, how they think. And I'm not even saying understand them. It is not a cognitive process, but literally experience them for their reality is where you start finding solutions, which is very rare. And I believe large part of your success comes from the fact that you could empathize with the other person or their challenges or their life situation. And then you could see the gap where, the advertiser in you could find a solution, and or like the
Correct.
engineer in you could find that logic. But very rarely people can empathize to the degree that you do, and you do that naturally with or without your knowledge.
Yeah. No, I would tend to agree that empathy is a huge, huge, huge trait, which is put yourself in the other person's shoes, and where that kind of helps is, behind every client is a human being. Behind every client is
Right.
somebody who's kind of got some challenges that he or she is trying to kind of solve for herself, for a brand, for a company. uh, Behind every brand is a story. There is a interesting story, and if we at least try and understand the story, I think one is able to then fit your solution into that narrative, and not just give a very staccato, like an open and shut solution, which may look really, really good, but does not fit into the overall narrative, because everything is a stream of consciousness. And when you look at it that way, then you want to kind of merge in with the story, rather than try to kind of go in there and solve some problem.
Nice.
And it's like many times, and extremely different situations, which is whole bunch of time I meet clients, and on the face of it they look like terrorizing, or they look like they have an agenda, or they have the agency briefs me that these are people you can never get an idea through them. And once you scratch beneath the surface, and when you look at them as human beings, and when you look at them and when you imagine them as fathers and mothers and brothers, and and when you change the sheer nature of the conversation, when you reframe the engagement in that sense, so the tougher they are, the more what do you call, the co-empathetic ones immediately reach out, and you kind of vibe, and you connect, and you create that certain. But there are ones, I just believe they have these walls or barriers between them, and when I reframe that relationship, and maybe in such meetings I don't even go and discuss work at first go, I try and kind of change the tack of approaching them, and maybe talk about their dog, or their, try and create some kind of a
Rapport.
different way, a different kind of a rapport. And it always helps, because the moment you break those walls down, and those people let you in, you suddenly discover empathy, and they empathize with you, and you empathize with them, and the relationship then is very, very different. Most of us are stories, in the sense, oh, like
Wow.
Aditi is
Wow.
a certain kind, and you already have heard that story, and but that's not the story. There's another story, and there are not just one. There are hundreds of stories, depending upon how that person, how it's like, depending on the point of view onto you. So
So
if I
the
ask, your family would be a different story, your colleagues would be a different story, and maybe some, so it's not physically possible to read all the stories, but at least knowing some few other stories can change your perception, either of a person, or a problem, or a brand, or a situation, or whatever it is.
or you can look at their handwriting and know the true story.
Totally. And so that's the superpower that you have, and saves you a lot of time of
Oh
not
my
having to sit
God.
and
And
listen to
how?
stories. Yes. I also believe advertising has played a very, very important role in the evolution of society. It is almost like in a world when there was no TV or there were lesser channels and stuff like that, it's always been at the forefront of human evolution, as in terms of consumption, in terms of capturing trends, in terms of communicating some of those trends. It's sometimes following culture, sometimes setting culture, and at the end of the day, all goods in that sense is to better the human condition. It's for us to. It's part of evolution. A phone, a soap, a refrigerator, a television. I was when I was growing up, there was no refrigerators. People found their own ways of refrigerating, or they cook from day to day. Today,
Oh,
we
yeah,
can
yeah.
kind of buy stuff, and advertising has played a role in kind of
Making life
uh,
easier in that sense.
making life easier. Almost walking shoulder to shoulder with humanity as we've kind of gone through this amazing path of evolution. And I can't think of a world without advertising. It would be really boring.
After 25 years of being in this career, if you have to pick up a few life lessons that you think advertising has taught you, what would they be and why?
Uh, Interesting one. After being in this profession, and the fact that it's been a bunch of amazingly strange people who've joined advertising. It's only been recent that you have a lot of these MBAs and people like that joining, but I've had dentists, I've had
Really?
yeah, you had all kinds of people. The misfits of the world joined advertising at some point of time,
Right.
and which made this a really, really interesting place in terms of the sheer experiences and the thought processes, that kind of got into the pot. But one thing advertising has kind of taught me is not to take oneself too seriously, in the sense, and that's the sheer nature of the business. It's like if you ask Charlie Chaplin this question, or if you ask somebody, or Disney this question, the fact that he
So
made
many movies.
animation films and amusement parks. I don't think I'm sure he took his business seriously, but he didn't take the purpose of life very seriously in advertising, because we are flitting from project to project to project, and someday you're selling baby soap, while on the other day you're selling cattle feed. You know, one thing it taught me is not to take myself too seriously, and the fact that life is transient. The second lesson, again, it's connected to the first lesson, which is don't forget your inner child, because I just believe that most of us get into this little adulting mode, and then we get so serious about this adulting mode that we tend to forget that at the core of it, at the origin of it, there is a child. Okay, and there is a child inside each one of us, and it's a child that kind of allows you to play,
Mm.
allows you to question, allows you to be curious. And I marvel at when I go see my cousins and my nephews, and newly born, and I look at them, and then I look at us, and I feel like I feel there is a sense of freedom. There is a sense of almost that curiosity and passion, and then the pleasure of discovery. And we are the same them. We were that, and yes, there are a lot of adult things to do, which is important. But at the same time, I believe once in a while, like meditation and going and being in touch with your inner child, I think really helps,
So what you
because
so what you're saying is do not let adulting spoil you completely, scar you
not
in
just
ways.
adulting. My point is, those are all little signals that you're sending to your brain, and I just believe that we are amazing when we are born, and then we start degenerating, and then at some point, it's we who are doing it to ourselves. If you play, if you do mad things, if you laugh a bit, if you play the fool, and if you do those things, I think you can break the degenerative process a bit.
I can't agree with you more. So before I conclude today's episode, I have to request one thing. You have to commit and tell us, Anil, when you're gonna start writing.
uh, yes. So like I said,
I know
I've
that was not
invested.
expected, but
No,
I
no. So this is what I did. I invested in a book. So I don't know whether it's writing or whether it will be sketching, but I've
but
invested. Yeah,
no,
but
the
I
way
will
you
do.
come up with your anecdotal stories and your observations and those, keen, acute things which otherwise are missed, and they're poetic in their own sense. I thoroughly enjoyed hearing how you have the different approach to look at very, very mundane everyday things. So that's why I'm
Yeah.
asking you, please tell us, and I'm asking you publicly, when would you get to writing seriously?
I know the only thing is, I think I'm a better storyteller than a writer. So,
Okay.
maybe, and I saw this really amazing dying trait in Morocco, which is the art of storytelling. So
Oh, okay.
they would sit in these cafes, and there would be these thing that
Storytellers.
is storytellers passed on from generation to generation, and they would have a bunch of 20, 30 people, and these guys would be really be good at storytelling. It's a dying form. You have various versions of this before, what do you call, Instagram feeds and all these newfangled things have totally destroyed the vibe. But yeah, I love, like I said, I love narrating. I love telling stories. So maybe
So
there's something to be
from
had there. Your what you're destined to do, or your superpower that you have inside you, which every human being has, I believe will come out in some form or the other.
And that was, I think, the beginning of our conversation. What you said was so powerful that people eventually will find it. So, if you can make the process faster for yourself or for your kids, for people around you, by creating the environment, that would be amazing so that people connect
Totally.
with themselves. And I believe that's like the happier way of going about it. That's the only way if you are living with your own passion, and the superpower is the only way to be happy.
Totally. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the show. This was a wonderful experience, and I personally learned so many things. Thank you.
Awesome, but I just want to say one thing, and not because I wanted to have the last word. I was a little skeptical of things like, I really didn't know what to kind of expect, but I'm really, really grateful. And I would like to maybe at some point, get to know this more in terms of how is it that, these little things, squiggles and stuff like that could throw up some more. But I've learned a lot from this as well, and a few key learnings. So very, very happy to have done this with you, and
Thank you.
thank you so very much.
Thank you
Grateful.
so
Thank you.
much.
Yes.
What was your key takeaway? There were so many moments in this conversation where he gave those anecdotes and he spoke about people as multiple stories. And, there were smaller observations which I feel can be transformational. I've seen this in people. When they engage with life and they do what they love to do, they also start experiencing life through the work that they do. So, if you are the lucky one, if you are doing something that you love to do, then make sure that you find ways of engaging with that experience more and more by involving all your senses. I think this conversation about involving five senses in your each and every experience is something that we spoke recently on one of our Friday episodes. So do check that out. If you want to know, how can you challenge your brain or your mind or your emotions in that sense, you can join India's first mental and emotional gym that we run on a weekly basis called APT. If you want to know more about it, the link is aptforme.com. APT is an abbreviation for aspire, perform, and transform. So, aptforme.com is the link that you want to check out, where we speak about how you can train your mind and your emotions on a daily basis. Like a physical workout or gym that you join, you also require mental and emotional workout. So, that is a space where you will find so many tools for you to keep yourself activated and trained in that area. If you want to know more about yourself and people around you with the help of graphology and see how this magnificent, fascinating subject can really lead to solving the biggest problems that you have, then you can join our graphology masterclass. The link and information is available on aditisurana.com. So if you go on the website, you'll find the details. I'll see you on Friday with one more episode of the Absolutely Right podcast. Till then, happy writing.